The Revolutionary War, where England and America fought over the latter's independence, was one of the most important events in the history of the United States. The American Revolution started with the Battle of Bunker Hill. In June of 1775, American militiamen went to Breed's Hill, Massachusetts, to take higher ground in order to fire down on the English, who were occupying Boston. When the British commander heard of the American position, he sent soldiers to remove them. The Americans fled, resulting in a win for the English troops. Though the Americans lost, their bravery led to the confidence they needed to face off against the British. The capture of Fort Ticonderoga happened in May 1775. The English fort in New York was taken by the Americans so they could steal the valuable military supplies it contained. In the dead of night, the American Green Mountain Boys surprised the British and stole the fort's cannon and gunpowder. These supplies would prove crucial to the American siege of Boston. In the siege of Boston, General Washington and his inexperienced military marched to take command of the militia surrounding Boston, Massachusetts, in an effort to free the city. In March of 1776, Washington positioned the Ticonderoga cannon on Dorchester Heights. The British then surrendered Boston to the Americans. For the first time since 1768, Boston was free of English control. In 1776, Thomas Jefferson was assigned by Congress to draft the Declaration of Independence. This document was supposed to convince France that the Americans wanted independence from England. The Americans hoped that it would convince the French to ally with them, but the French would need proof of the Americans' competence in war first. The Battle of Long Island was fought during the summer of 1776. British General Howe devised a plan to capture New York City and use it as a base to destroy the American stronghold, Massachusetts. However, Commander Washington knew about his plan and marched the Continental Army to defend Long Island. Unfortunately for Washington, he was outnumbered, and the geography of Manhattan Island made it difficult to defend. After a fierce attack, Washington retreated to Brooklyn Heights, where he was trapped. Instead of surrendering, as Howe expected him to, Washington was able to escape across the East River with his troops during the night. After the Battle of Long Island, Washington changed his tactics to the War of Post, designed to tire out the English until they decided the war was no longer in their interests. This tactic would eventually prove beneficial for the Americans. Washington's troops' enlistments were almost up, so he desperately needed to convince soldiers to re-enlist in the army by winning a battle. In a bid for such a victory, he decided to launch a surprise attack on the Hessian-held town of Trenton, New Jersey. In December of 1776, Washington marched to the town of Trenton. A storm concealed the noise of the troops and was so bad that the Hessian commander brought in all guards and search parties, as he did not expect an attack. The Hessians were taken completely by surprise, and the Americans took the city with ease. The Battle of Trenton was significant because it got both new recruits and present soldiers to re-enlist or enlist. In early 1777, an English general named John Burgoyne hatched an approved plan to cut off New England from the rest of the colonies. According to his outline, British General Howe would march his troops from New York City and would meet Burgoyne's troops in Albany, where they would then, together, isolate New England. However, Howe had a different plan to capture Philadelphia. In September, Burgoyne and his army were met in Saratoga, New York, by the American Horatio Gates. The armies clashed in the two battles of Saratoga, but the Americans were too strong, and Burgoyne was forced to surrender. The militias and Continental Army's win coaxed the French to become open allies with the Americans, ultimately crucial to the Americans' win. In July 1777, General Howe continued with his plan to capture Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He believed it was the capital of the Revolution, therefore, the Americans would surrender at its British occupation, as they would in typical European war. In September, the two armies met near Brandywine Creek. Both sides fought bravely, but the English eventually proved victorious, and forced the English to retreat and the Continental Congress to flee. The Battle of Brandywine Creek was important because the English captured Philadelphia. In 1778, General Henry Clinton, the new commander of British forces in America, decided to evacuate Howe's troops from hostile Philadelphia and bring them to New York. Washington followed the English troops as they marched. The two armies met near Monmouth, New Jersey, and a fierce battle raged through the day. Clinton and his army snuck away after they stopped for the night. The battle was technically a tie, but the Americans were the real winners. The Battle of Monmouth was significant because it was the last in the northern colonies. In 1778, The English government was having difficulty conquering the northern colonies, so they decided to move their campaigns to the south, where the citizens were supposedly more loyal to England. In December of 1778, English General Clinton and his forces easily captured Georgia's main port city, Savannah. Then, in May of 1780, the English captured Charleston, South Carolina, after a long battle. These battles were a major blow to the southern division of the American military. Awaiting a counterattack after a fight called the Battle of Cowpens, General Nathanael Greene linked his forces up with General Daniel Morgan's troops. In March of 1781, at Guilford Courthouse in North Carolina, a battle raged back and forth between the British and American forces. Eventually, Greene told the American forces to retreat. The English had won, however they lost many men, and throughout the summer American forces were able to chip away at their military, gaining back control of the Carolinas. The battle at Guilford Courthouse was significant because, although the English won, they lost many men that would be difficult to replace, and the Americans gained the Carolinas. In August of 1781, Cornwallis had grown tired of marching in the country and decided to try his luck in Yorktown, Virginia. When he reached Yorktown, Cornwallis was surrounded by Washington, his troops, and their French allies. Cornwallis was trapped and was forced to surrender his army. As a result, the English began real peace negotiations with the Americans. The Battle of Yorktown ended the Revolutionary War. After the surrender at Yorktown, despite the objections of King George, a peace negotiation, called the Treaty of Paris, was signed in September 1783. It stated that the Americans were free and independent states. In the treaty, England also granted the United States valuable fishing rights off the Canadian coast and relinquished their claims to the Ohio Valley. The Americans promised, in return, to give confiscated property back to American loyalists. The United States of America was now officially free.